many of you know, I spent 15 years in the pharmaceutical industry. I spent 10 years with Novartis as commercial director and doing R&D. I'd like to just tell you a very quick story which is going to illustrate why we have the problem that we have and what a solution could be. I managed a product called cyclosporin, which is if you ever have kidney failure or heart failure and you need a transplant, you're very likely to get this drug. It's a world-beating drug. It's an immunosuppressant, and it had 20 years patent life, like every drug, and the patent was to end in the mid-90s. And when you think about that 20 years, it normally takes about 10 to 12 years to research and develop that drug, and then you have about 8 to 10 years of marketing to recoup your investment. And of course, what you'd really like to not just have 20 years, you'd like to have another 10 or as much as possible. So many people in drug companies are focused on how to extend patent life and how to stop generics taking their business. Because once generics comes in, as Katie showed you, the prices tumble and the originator can't compete, usually. So we worked on a new formulation, which was a microemulsion formulation. And it was successfully developed just in time. And the idea was to put this formulation on the market and take the old one off so that the generic could not then compete, because you'd put a new formulation on the market, so it was no longer equivalent. This strategy enabled Novartis to have at least another 5, even 10 years of extra sales life. Now you may say, shame on you, okay? Fortunately, we also did a big clinical trial which showed that this formulation stopped more rejection of kidneys than the old one. It gave much more stable blood levels and so on. But the point I want to make is that our motive was not to improve treatment, to save more patients' lives. It was to make more money and to have a bigger profit over a longer period. And companies do all sorts of things. They pre-market drugs, they try and promote them before they have a license, and it's illegal to do that. They do combinations with other drugs to try and prevent generic competition, and they make new formulations. They might even just change the salt, and that's something we call it evergreening. In other words, you're trying to just make some differences to continue your sales and profit. And this is the problem, that the culture in pharmaceutical companies is we have this system and we have to get the money back and we have to make as much money as possible. So for every 100 drugs that are discovered, 99 will fail. So your R&D is also paying for them, as well as the one that gets all the way through the phases to market. And basically what you have is the R&D is linked in with the product price. And the way that pharmaceutical companies get their money back is by charging much higher prices than the cost of production, because they are trying to recoup the 10, 12 years for that drug and for the other 99 drugs that failed. Okay, so when we talk about the drug industry, we can be very polarized and say it's evil and we hate it and so on. I left it because of some of these issues. But the people working there, they're good people, but they're just focused on making money, as if you were selling Mars bars or anything else. So it's not their fault in a sense, it is the fault of this system that is a global system that links pricing to the R&D. So, what can be done? Well, first of all, when you talk about poor countries, so in the first world, that patent system does work. So in terms of the number of new drugs we've had over however many years, 50 years, it has produced much better than, say, in communist countries where they've tried to produce drugs in a different way without the profit motive and linking product prices to R&D. So in the first world, yeah, you can argue it works okay. You can see it could be more efficient, but you know, it's a market system, it's a capitalist system, and it means drugs are prioritised, which will give a return. In poor countries, though, it is terrible. It is not designed at all for the needs of poor countries. So it means that medicines, vaccines, diagnostics, they're completely unaffordable. You're at the mercy of the drug companies to be compassionate and to give a voluntary license and to cut the price somewhat. Yeah, that's how the system works. They're unavailable, so why would a drug company try and make products for diseases where they're going to get no return? They're unsuitable. So ones for the first drugs for the first world, they're not heat stable, they're not the right diagnostic kits, no child formulations, and so on. So that's the existing problems for poor countries. So a couple of slides on potential solution. So CEWG stands for the Consultative Expert Working Group. So this is a WHO initiative. It's been going on for some years. And what it's trying to do is to tackle this problem that I've just outlined. And there are some recommendations in the middle of last year, and there was then a meeting in November, December of 2012, so quite recent. I'll tell you about the progress in a second. But what's this all about? Well, the first thing to say is it's not designed to replace the whole global R&D patent system. It's to work in parallel to the current intellectual property system, but it's looking at encouraging innovation and access right from the beginning. So you don't just get a drug to market, you think about how everybody's going to access it at the same time. We need increased financing for these poor areas that can't give a return on investment. And there needs to be complete global coordination and, you know, setting which drugs are priority, which diseases are priority. So the solution, the Global Binding Convention on Research and Development. And lots of discussions so far. The key point is to de-link the costs of R&D from the price of health technologies in lieu of the current system of patent monopolies. So when we talk about this binding convention, it needs to be afforded by either innovative means, tobacco taxes, alcohol taxes, or 0.01% of GDP of countries would go into a pot, which would be used. And then the mechanisms we're talking about will be things like prizes for innovation, stage payments for development and marketing, so that, in other words, you're paid, drug companies paid along the way, rather than having to recoup all the costs in the price later on. Okay, so trying to just give you an overview of this sort of solution. Where's it up to? Wrong computer. November, the member states met. However, there was quite a lot of opposition to a binding treaty. And in actual fact, MSF wrote quite a stinging letter saying this is huge disappointment, and many other organisations signed on to that. Basically, not much happened. So all that they have put forward as a resolution is, the main thing is the initiation of a global health observatory, which essentially looks at analysing what research is going on, what gaps there are, and so on. And it's a necessary thing, but you know, we feel that we could tell them that probably without having this set up to begin with. And a proposal on differing mechanisms to encourage R&D, and then another meeting in 2016. Yeah, put it off for 4 years. Why not? And just have these things going along. Where's the sense of urgency? And this group has been, I think this is probably the third meeting or something of the expert working group anyway. So this has not just come out this year, you know, it's been worked on for a few years. And it's very discouraging that faster progress is not being made. If I want to look positively, then at least something is going on. And I think this is one of the things that we want to campaign on, to move this forward much faster. So my last slide is simply that what we want to look at developing is a global de-linkage campaign to raise public awareness, gain political leverage, explain this issue, and to put pressure on WHO and member states to move faster. So it's a complicated subject, and I think pharmaceuticals is generally, but I hope that's given you a flavour at least of what the issue is and what a potential solution could be.